Willkommen bei Kontext TV.
Welcome to Kontext TV. The 1990s were marked by a global triumph of capitalism. Today, however, facing financial crises, climate change and a food crisis, more and more people wonder if this economic system is able to resolve the big challenges of our future, or if capitalism is rather part of the problem. Immanuel Wallerstein, professor of sociology at Yale University, Connecticut, has studied extensively the economic system that has spread over the world during the last 500 years. He has developed a world system theory, which was discussed internationally both with recognition and controversy. We talked to Wallerstein at the World Social Forum in Dakar. We are here at the Savannah Hotel in Dakar. With us is Immanuel Wallerstein.
Mr. Wallerstein, you have predicted some years ago that global capitalism will not survive the next 30 years. Explain why you have come to this prediction.
Well, first of all, you start with a couple of assumptions. All systems have lives. No system is eternal. And the reason all systems, and that goes from the universe as an entire system to the smallest subatom system. All systems have lives. And the reason all systems have lives is they all have internal contradictions, and over time they move far from equilibrium. And when they move far enough from equilibrium, they begin to oscillate enormously, and they have what the scientists of complexity call, in this chaotic situation, a bifurcation. And at that point, the system cannot survive, but where it will go is uncertain because there are two alternative possibilities. That's a general premise. Now, if you look at the capitalist system as a particular historical social system, then you see that there are certain phenomena which have led it to the point where it is moved far from equilibrium. Basically, capitalism is a system seeking the endless accumulation of capital. That's its only objective. It continuously attempts to do this. In order to attempt to do this, they have to create enterprises which obtain profit and therefore accumulate capital. If you look at the costs for a capitalist of any enterprise, he has three basic costs. One cost is the cost of personnel, paying the personnel from the top personnel to the bottom personnel. And the second basic cost of a capitalist is paying for the inputs that go into the production of whatever he's producing. And the third basic cost is taxation in all its forms, which is a phenomenon that is standard throughout the system. Now, if you look at the history, this will take a long time to account in detail, but if you look at the history of all three phenomena, the costs of personnel, the costs of inputs, and the cost of taxation, they have been steadily going up for 500 years. And if you at the same time realize that there is a limit to how much you can raise prices, which is the limit of the willingness of people to purchase items, then what you have is an increasing cost level going up for 500 years, reaching what I call asymptotes, at which point when it gets close enough to the top, the system begins to oscillate, and you get enormous constant shifts in what's going on. That's a chaotic situation, and that's where we are. I've written about this in great detail in various places, but basically the basic argument is that it is no longer possible for capitalists to really accumulate capital. And since that's the whole point of the system, to accumulate capital, the system no longer makes sense from the point of view of capitalists. Of course, it never made sense from the point of view of the populations of the world who were exploited and so forth. That's not new. That's a constant. And it isn't that the populations of the world are more upset than they've always been. They've always been upset. But what has really changed is the degree to which, for capitalists themselves, capitalism is a useful system. So that's the crisis, the structural crisis of the system in which we find ourselves today.
In Europe, we have stagnating labor costs, or stagnating at least incomes, and we have globalization, where the production is going to Romania, to China, to cheaper countries.
Yes,
we have tax cuts for big companies. So it's unusual to hear that all these costs going up for.
Well, but you have to look at it in terms of costs going up and down. The costs always go up and down, right? And if you look at how it's worked over 500 years, all these cost levels, you will see that in periods of expansion, which last about 25 or 30 years, we tend to call them Kondratiev phases, but that the name is unimportant. When in periods of expansion, the costs go up. And in periods of stagnation, the costs go down again. They're pushed down. They're never pushed down as much as they've gone up. So it's what I call a ratchet effect. It goes up 2, but goes down 1. It goes up 2, it goes down 1. And that's been happening for 500 years. If you take simple costs, and this your readers will, or your listeners will understand, if you compare the costs, the price of labor, right? Not with 1970, which is a high point, and it's lower today. But if you compare it to 1945, it's higher today. So it went up from 1945 to 70. It went down from 70 to 2010. No question about that. But it didn't go down to the 1945 level. And that's the point. And you can move that back in time and time and time, and you will see, you can trace it very easily on a chart. It constantly goes up 2, goes down 1, and if you start, how shall I say, if you measure it on some kind of scale in which 100% is the maximum, and you start at 20% for, let's say, labor costs, and you move up to 30 and then down to 25, and up to 35 and down to 30, and so on. When you get to 80, you're too close. And that's when the system begins to shake. So basically, there's a limit to how long you continue this process. We've continued it for 500 years. It's worked very well. Capitalism has been a magnificently successful system in its own terms. It has achieved what it set out to achieve, which was this enormous expansion of accumulated capital, right? But it can't continue to do that. It's reached the limits of what it can possibly do. And at that point, it loses its interest for the capitalist. If he can't really accumulate capital anymore, then why put in the effort and the energy and so forth? So I think that's the basic situation. Now, I'm saying this as the analyst. If you ask me, does every capitalist in the world realize this? No. Every capitalist in the world does not realize this. Every worker in the world does not realize this. But there are enough who realize it. And the objective reality is such that it forces them to make certain kinds of decisions. These days, basically, as in any long stagnation period, money is not made from production. Money is made from financial speculation, and speculation works, but it only works up to a point. Speculation works by indebting people, and you run through bubbles, and we've had magnificent bubbles since the 70s, one after another, and we're in fact we've just had the next to the last bubble. That was the so-called Great Crisis of 2007, 2008. It's not the last one, because the last one is now going to be the indebtedness of governments, and one after another is going to collapse under its debt, which it cannot figure out any way of paying. That's a reality. So I think capitalism is in great trouble as a system, and the question is what happens. And there I say, well, it bifurcates, and there are two alternatives. One is for those who are privileged in the existing system and would like to maintain their position of privilege, is to find another kind of system that would give them the same privileges, that is, the same kind of a system which would be hierarchical, exploitative, and polarizing. It doesn't have to be a capitalist system. It isn't the only way you can achieve that objective. In fact, it could be a much worse system than capitalism. Capitalism may not be the worst system the world has ever seen. Okay, so that's alternative A. And alternative B is quite the opposite. It's a system that's relatively democratic and relatively egalitarian, a system the world has never seen. And basically, that's our historical choice. And now I have to throw in a last element. What you can say in this kind of situation of bifurcation is it's absolutely inherently impossible to predict which of the choices we will collectively make. And that is because it's the result of an infinity of detailed decision-making by an infinity of persons over an infinity of moments. And it's impossible to predict. You can only predict that the existing system will collapse, and one of the choices will be made. So the battle, the political battle of the next 20, 30, 40 years is whether the system will go in one direction or another, will tilt in one way or another. At some point in a chaotic situation of this kind, the system tilts sort of definitively, and then you get a new order, a new kind of system that succeeds, and then goes on for whatever its natural life will turn out to be, and somewhere down the line, 500 or 1,000 years later, that system too may be in trouble. But you know, we won't be around to worry about that one. What I can say is that if you come back in the year 2050, we will be living in a different kind of system. I don't know which kind of system. I know which kind of system I prefer that we live in, but I don't know which kind of system we will be living in.